It's very important, and that really was sort of Etta's part in that.
She was Hollywood royalty, the face that defined a generation of American cinema.
It's all, you know, we've always...
You worked with them before.
I'm waiting for the sirens.
Thank you.
Elaine Robinson in The Graduate, a role so perfectly performed that critics ran out of words trying to describe what she did on that screen. Standing next to Paul Newman and Robert Redford in Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. Grace under pressure. Elegance without effort. The kind of actress Hollywood builds entire eras around. The press loved her. The studios promoted her. The public trusted her completely. And then in 2010, a police report was filed. Not a rumor. Not a tabloid story. Not an anonymous source whispering something unprovable into a gossip column. An official police report, describing an incident inside the private home of Katherine Ross that the people closest to her had spent years making sure the world would never see clearly. Her daughter had attacked her with scissors. And by the time you finish this video, you will understand that the scissors were not the beginning of this story. They were the moment the controlled narrative finally broke open. Let us go back to where the official version starts. Because every controlled narrative has a starting point. A moment where the image is constructed deliberately and everything that does not fit gets quietly managed out of the public conversation.
I've been in this game for 50 years, and the last thing I ever thought about was having my hands.
For Katherine Ross, that starting point is the mid-1960s. She does not arrive in Hollywood loudly, does not crash through the door demanding attention. She moves through the industry quietly, patiently, with a focus and a stillness that most people in that business never develop no matter how long they stay. Small television roles first. Minor film appearances. Nothing that announces itself as the beginning of something significant. And then The Graduate happens. 1967. Mike Nichols directing. Dustin Hoffman as Benjamin Braddock. And Katherine Ross as Elaine Robinson. The girl Benjamin is supposed to stay away from. The girl he cannot stay away from. The girl the entire film pivots around. Her performance is not loud. Not theatrical. Not the kind of acting that announces itself as acting. It is just real. And in 1967, when American cinema was going through its most significant transformation since the invention of sound, real was exactly what audiences were desperate for. The film becomes a cultural landmark. Katherine Ross becomes a household name overnight. And the machine that is Hollywood looks at her, measures the return on investment, and immediately constructs the image it needs her to maintain. Elegant. Composed. Refined. Private enough to be mysterious. Public enough to sell tickets. That image gets built carefully and professionally. And everything that does not fit inside, it gets managed. Here is the first thing the managed narrative glosses over. Katherine Ross was married 5 times. 5. The press covered some of it. Handled carefully. Framed sympathetically. The difficulties of maintaining relationships under the pressure of fame. The complexity of 2 careers competing for the same emotional bandwidth. The standard Hollywood explanation that makes personal struggle sound like an inevitable occupational hazard rather than something that might require a harder and more honest examination. What the coverage never examined directly was what those years of instability were doing to the people living inside them, including a daughter named Cleo Rose Elliott, born in 1984 to Katherine Ross and Sam Elliott, a child who grew up with 2 of the most recognizable faces in Hollywood as her parents, who never had the option of a normal childhood because normal was not available inside the life her parents inhabited, who developed her own identity, chose music over acting, built her own career on her own terms, and who in 2010 picked up a pair of scissors during an argument with her mother and used them. Stop right there. Because this is the moment the official narrative has handled most carefully. The coverage that exists around the 2010 incident is minimal. Deliberately minimal. A family with serious connections to Hollywood's most powerful circles. A controlled narrative that had been professionally managed for decades. A story that multiple outlets covered briefly and then allowed to recede. But the police report exists. And the restraining order application exists. And what they describe is not a single impulsive moment between a mother and daughter who had a bad afternoon. They describe the visible surface of something that had been building for years underneath a family image that the public had been given no accurate information about. Cleo Rose Elliott did not grow up easy. Growing up as the child of 2 famous people who value privacy above almost everything else means growing up in a specific kind of silence. A silence where the things that are difficult do not get processed publicly, because processing things publicly is not what this family does. where the emotional weight of being permanently in the shadow of names that belong to the world before they belong to you accumulates without a visible release valve. The music career Cleo built was her attempt to step outside that shadow, to be something that was entirely hers. But you cannot fully step outside a shadow that follows you into every room you enter simply because of whose daughter you are. And the tension that created between a daughter trying to establish an identity entirely her own and a mother whose identity was so thoroughly established that escaping its gravity was almost structurally impossible. That tension did not begin in 2010. 2010 was just when it finally became impossible to keep contained. Here is what nobody in the coverage of this incident ever asked directly. What was happening inside that house in the years before the scissors? Because restraining orders do not emerge from single incidents in families with no prior history. Courts do not grant protection orders based on one afternoon gone wrong. The legal standard requires documented evidence of a pattern, of escalation, of behavior that establishes genuine and ongoing risk. Katherine Ross filed for that restraining order, and it was granted, which means that what the public saw in 2010 was not the beginning. It was the point at which a mother decided that the private management of a deteriorating family situation had reached its limit. Think about what that decision costs. This is not a woman making a public statement. This is not someone feeding a story to the press or managing the narrative to her advantage. Filing a restraining order against your own child is the opposite of managing a narrative. It is the moment when the narrative becomes impossible to manage any longer. Katherine Ross had spent decades protecting the image. Her image. Sam Elliott's image. The image of a family that Hollywood's most famous power couples are expected to project. And in 2010, she chose her physical safety over that image. That choice tells you more about how serious the situation had become than any official statement ever could. Now here is the part that changes how you see the entire story. Sam Elliott, one of the most beloved figures in American entertainment. The voice, the mustache, the unshakable presence that has made him one of Hollywood's most enduring and universally respected actors. His public image is built on a specific foundation. Steady, reliable, the kind of man you trust completely because he has never given you a single reason not to. That image is real. Their marriage is real. After 5 previous marriages, Katherine Ross found in Sam Elliott something she had not found before. Stability, genuine mutual respect. A partnership built on shared understanding of a world that destroys most relationships it touches. Their marriage in 1984 became one of the quiet success stories of an industry better known for spectacular failures. And that stability, that genuine and hard-earned stability between two people who understood each other completely, was happening simultaneously with a family situation involving their daughter that was anything but stable. That contrast is not a contradiction. It is a reminder that a marriage can be genuinely strong and functional, while a family can be quietly fracturing along lines that are invisible from the outside. Hollywood teaches you to show the world the version that holds together. The Ross Elliott family did that for years, until 2010 made it impossible. After the restraining order, after the media coverage that flared briefly and then was carefully allowed to fade, Katherine Ross did something that the official narrative has framed as a graceful and voluntary transition toward a quieter life. She stepped back, became more selective about her work, focused on personal peace and private stability. That framing is not wrong, but it is incomplete, because stepping back after the most publicly painful moment of your private life is not the same as choosing peace freely. It is what survival looks like when the alternative is continuing to expose yourself and your family to a level of public scrutiny that the situation cannot withstand. She had given Hollywood 40 years. She had given it elegance and composure and performances that helped define what American cinema could be. And in 2010, Hollywood gave her back the thing it gives everyone eventually. The reminder that the image it helped you build does not protect you from what happens inside your own home. Here is what the official legacy coverage of Katherine Ross never fully addresses. The Graduate made her famous. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid made her iconic. The Stepford Wives showed a range that went far beyond what her early roles suggested. That is the career. That is the record. That is the version that exists in film school syllabi and documentary retrospectives and anniversary coverage in publications that cover classic Hollywood. But the actual life. The 5 marriages before Sam Elliott. The daughter who grew up in the specific emotional pressure of being the child of 2 people whose names belong to the world. The years of quiet family deterioration that the controlled narrative successfully kept out of public view. The The 2010 incident that broke through that control with a police report and a restraining order, and the kind of coverage that no publicist can fully suppress once the legal system is involved. That is the story that does not appear in the legacy coverage. Because legacy coverage is its own controlled narrative, built to preserve an image that the actual life often fails to match. Katherine Ross is in her 80s now, still married to Sam Elliott, still remembered as one of the most elegant and gifted actresses of her generation. And her daughter Cleo Rose Elliott is out there somewhere building her own life, her own identity, her own story that exists separately from the one her parents made famous. Whether they reconciled is private. Whether the distance between them closed or remained is private. Whether the scissors and the restraining order and the years of accumulated tension that produced them have been processed and healed between two people who share the most fundamental biological bond that exists. Private. Because that is how this family has always operated. Private. Even when the police report made privacy impossible. Even when the courts made privacy impossible. Even when the reality of what was happening inside the house became briefly and unavoidably visible to anyone paying attention. The image held. The narrative recovered. And the world went back to remembering Katherine Ross the way Hollywood needs her to be remembered. Elegant. Composed. Iconic. The face that defined an era. Not the woman who had to file a restraining order against her own daughter to feel safe in her own home. The scariest part of Katherine Ross's story is not the scissors. The scariest part is how effectively the machine managed the aftermath. How a story that involved a police report and a court-granted restraining order and a physical attack by one family member on another became a brief news cycle that faded within weeks. How the legacy coverage that exists today barely references it. How the controlled narrative was rebuilt so completely that most people who know Katherine Ross's name from The Graduate have no idea that 2010 happened at all. She is not the only one. Behind every carefully constructed Hollywood legacy is a private reality that the machine has decided does not fit the image it needs to protect. Katherine Ross is just the one where the police report made it impossible to pretend for a moment. The others are still completely invisible, and the machine is still running. Subscribe. Because we're just getting started pulling back the curtain on the lives Hollywood decided you did not need to know about. And the next one is even closer to the surface than this.